Finance Department put out a statement today in response to the case. Well, let me read that out, including the most salient points regarding how they came up with the 89.9 billion peso figure. Well, it said an extensive review of the financial statements of all GOCCs was conducted and revealed that PhilHealth had accumulated a substantial sum of excess, unused, and idle funds over the past few years, amounting to 183.1 billion. However, the DOF exercised a prudent and moral decision to limit the return to the excess, idle, and unused government subsidies from 2021 to 2023, thus arriving at 89.9 billion.
It goes on to say that mobilizing PhilHealth's excess funds will not in any way hamper its ability to provide quality services to its members. In fact, it remains in a strong financial position, which has enabled it to expand its benefit packages last year. PhilHealth's total assets amount to 598 billion as of end September 2024. To recall, the money was transferred out of PhilHealth in tranches last year, 20 billion pesos in May, 10 billion in August, and 30 billion in October. The final batch, which was 29.9 billion, was supposed to be remitted back to the Treasury on November 11, but the TRO from the Supreme Court stopped it. That's after at least 3 petitions were filed questioning the constitutionality of the fund transfers.
All right, at this point, let's bring in former Finance Undersecretary Cielo Magno. She is one of the petitioners against what some have called the impounding of PhilHealth's funds, and I believe she joins us on the line. Good evening, Yusek Magno, Professor Magno, I should call you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi, good evening. I can hear you.
Perfect. Prof, first of all, I wonder if you could give us an update on how the oral arguments today at the Supreme Court went. Were you able to attend, and how was your assessment?
Yes, I was able to attend, and based on my assessment and what I heard from the government side is that, the clear argument from their side is that they're saying they're the PhilHealth fund on the basis of creativity and innovativeness in terms of fiscal management. And I surmise that there's no strong legal foundation or basis on the action of Department of Finance.
And yet the DOF today issued a statement, Professor. It's a very long statement, parts of which essentially they're arguing that it was legally sound. They consulted the Office of the Solicitor General before they proceeded with the transfer. They also consulted the GOCCs, and in the end they said they exercised prudent and moral decision in coming up with that 89.9 billion pesos. How do we reconcile that viewpoint?
Well, the key question that was asked by the members of the Supreme Court today is how we define the surplus fund. And based on the government's explanation, it clearly showed that there's no legal basis on the definition of surplus fund that they presented. And even when I look at this surplus fund that the DOF is referring to, if you look at it, it's basically the difference between what government provided, the subsidy to indirect contributors, minus what they actually spent for indirect contributors. This is a basic violation, or it contradicts some basic foundation of insurance on risk pooling. So for me, there's no legal basis. There's no basis on basic insurance principles. So that's my assessment of what I saw today in the presentation of the government.
All right, Professor Cielo, we know that the DOF did say have a long statement and they tried to explain. I was wondering if their reasoning or their explanations was satisfactory to you, and also they again re-emphasized that they were just following the directives of Congress, that fourth provision that you were talking about in your podcasts when, sa kasagsagan itong issue, right?
Right. Well, the discussion today centered on Section 11 of the Universal Health Care Act, where it was very clear that the PhilHealth can have a reserve fund, and any amount in excess of the reserve fund can only be used to improve the benefits of the members or adjust the premium of the members. And so the justices were asking what the basis is of the computation of the surplus because the law does not provide for provision or for any surplus fund. And that was not answered clearly by the Department of Finance. So I don't know where their argument that they have a legal basis is coming from, but that was clearly what emerged in the discussion in the court today.
Professor, yung surplus funds, pareho ba yan sa reserve fund? Kasi PhilHealth is required to have
No.
iba pa yun.
Yes. So what they're saying is that on top of the reserve fund, they have a surplus fund. And the reserve fund is actually designed to cover the contingent liability of PhilHealth. These are anticipated expenses that PhilHealth should be able to cover in the event that these expenses are realized. So what the Department of Finance is saying is after computing the reserve fund, they're able to compute for surplus funds, which on that basis, they collected and transferred to the Treasury.
Okay,
So the key question is there legal basis to have a surplus fund? And unfortunately, there's no such thing in the law because what the law says is that if you have excess money on top of the reserve fund, the only option for government is to adjust the benefits or refund, reduce the premium that the members are paying.
Okay, but do you think it's a conflict of definition? I mean, we're here trying to flesh out what's surplus, what's reserve, how much insurance contract liabilities should be kept by PhilHealth. But when we talk to DOH, sabi nila that we're trying to make PhilHealth more efficient in its use of money because it's supposed to be improving on its packages. And we saw that lately. They improved on almost all of their programs. So it makes us wonder if this pressure on PhilHealth actually made them do their job better.
Yes, I'm actually happy that they're now adjusting all the packages. But there are a lot of questions that are emerging on the way they presented the information. For example, there was a question on how they're computing the reserve fund. And they said that they are basing this on past operational costs of PhilHealth. If you are aware of how actuarial projections are made, this cannot be based on historical, you base it on historical data, but assuming future expenses. So you have to make adjustments based on anticipated expenses, not based on historical costs. That's one. And then second, I think the issue of accountability is also something important because in the first place, aside from the management's responsibility of making sure that they improve the services of PhilHealth, the board of PhilHealth, which includes the Secretary of Finance, Secretary of Budget, the Secretary of Health, have a moral responsibility to make sure that PhilHealth does its job of providing Filipinos sufficient packages to cover our health expenditures. But unfortunately, what emerged, and based on the presentation of the government, is that over the years, there's this surplus fund, while we Filipinos are only benefiting a small coverage from PhilHealth. So it means that there's significant inefficiency in PhilHealth, and the surplus fund that they are presenting is based on this inefficiency, and I would attribute this inefficiency to the inability of the management to improve its services and for the board to not demanding accountability from the management.
There are a lot of words here whose definition are being argued at this point. So you talked about surplus, you talked about reserve funds. Let me introduce a few others. The DOF used the words excess, unused, and idle funds to describe the 183.1 billion pesos that they said PhilHealth had, which is what they based the 89.9 billion pesos on to begin with. They said they realized that PhilHealth had accumulated this amount over the years. Let me zero in on the word unused there. What is the issue here with the fact that that amount was unused, if it was indeed 183 billion pesos?
That's actually what's bothering me, because in the first place, for example, if you have a reserve fund, you should not really use it because it has to be a ready fund that the PhilHealth can use to cover its liability. On the other hand, based on the Section 11, if they do it on top of, well, refunding or reducing premium and expanding services, PhilHealth can also have an investment fund. So if it's idle, are they saying that they did not invest the money? So these are the emerging questions, and I think it's good that they're being put on the table. But an important thing would be to hold the management and the board of PhilHealth accountable for the failure to properly manage the finances of PhilHealth and for the failure to expand the services that we should getting from them.
As far as you know, Professor Cielo, supposedly this idea to transfer the idle / excess / unused surplus reserve fund was cleared by the COA as well as the GOCC, I believe it's called, the Corporate Governance Commission governing GOCCs. Is it because there has been no precedent, or like what went on there?
Well, if you look at the COA report, they're highlighting that PhilHealth is financially unhealthy because they do not have sufficient funds to cover their contingent liability. So I'm not sure COA is agreeing to the transfer of funds to the Treasury. The OGCC, I would assume, because you have said they consulted the OGCC, and that they're arguing that their action was based on the provision of the GAA. So I would assume that in the succeeding discussion in the Supreme Court, that will be further threshed out.
Okay.
Prof, a new PhilHealth CEO, was introduced today. That's Dr. Edwin Mercado. I want to get your reaction to that. And what would be your challenge to the new head of the state insurer?
Yeah, well, that's a welcome move because we've been calling for the removal of the president of PhilHealth. But in fact, not just the president, but the whole management of PhilHealth needs a revamp. But I would, my primary concern is really making sure that they expand the benefit of PhilHealth, benefit coverage, but at the same time, to also make sure that there are providers. Because, for example, PhilHealth keeps on saying that we have this consulta package and that everyone is covered. But despite the fact that this package exists, it's not really available to everyone because there are no providers where we can use the services. So providing the supplier is also important in terms of making sure that PhilHealth is effective. So that's one. And then second, I would like to actually challenge in relation to the absence of budget for 2025, because that's another legal question that we haven't really discussed, right? And we are planning to file a case against it. I would actually want to challenge the government. If it is true that there's excess money that's not being used, and if the government is not providing its counterpart in terms of the premium of indirect payers, then I would challenge the president to also issue a moratorium in terms of premium payments of regular workers. Because if the government is not paying its premium, why would regular, ordinary Filipino pay its premium when they are saying there are excess funds? So let's utilize the money. Let's use all this quote-unquote idle funds to finance PhilHealth and resume the payments when the government decides to provide its counterpart also.
I want to get ahead of the Supreme Court here, Professor, but I wonder if I could hear your expert insights. Who do you think has the bigger liability here? The DOF for interpreting the funds, the financial statements of PhilHealth as such, or as Sean pointed out, it was Congress who ordered that the so-called excess funds of the 2024 GAA be remitted to finance unprogrammed appropriations?
I think both branches of government have accountability here. One, Congress, for going beyond its mandate in terms of framing the GAA and trying to amend existing laws by allowing the executive to tap GOCC money. But on the other hand, DOF, for also being a member of the board and not pushing PhilHealth to do its job of providing better services and better coverage for Filipino people. And instead of doing that, actually trying to get the money to use it to cover for infrastructure projects that are actually unfunded, which is actually the root cause of all these problems.
Yeah, like just to go a bit off topic, that was weird because in this year's budget, they removed the counterpart funding to those big infra projects. So I'm just like, what the heck happened there? But in any case, Professor Cielo, would you know like what happened to the 60 billion that was already remitted before the TRO came out? Do we know whether or not it really did go to where they said it would be going, which is to pay for the back pay of the healthcare workers from the COVID pandemic, et cetera, et cetera? Basically, it was a lot of it also went to those mga utang, no, in terms of medically related
Right.
things.
Well, I think I saw some documents showing that the 60 billion was used to finance some of those unprogrammed appropriations, including infrastructure, based on a pronouncement of the Department of Finance. But nevertheless, depending on how the case in the court goes, we are hoping that the courts would require DOF to return the money to PhilHealth to make sure that PhilHealth is able to finance its function.
Is that even really possible, though, Professor Cielo, for the money to be returned?
Yes, yes. If the court decides that the DOF has to return the money, then DOF has to return the money.
I want to get some clarity.
Especially if we're able to, especially if we're able to present an argument that not returning the money will put PhilHealth in a very bad financial position. And if you look at the COA assessment of the financial position of PhilHealth, it clearly shows that PhilHealth is in a negative equity position currently. So it means that it doesn't have sufficient fund for contingent liability. And listening to how they presented their data this afternoon, they're saying that PhilHealth has 280-something reserve fund, when in reality, PhilHealth should have reserve fund equivalent to 2 years of forecasted expenditure, not historical expenditure, but forecasted expenditure. If you look at the mandate of PhilHealth and how much they should be spending, for example, consulta package alone, it's 1,700 per head, multiplied by the total population of Filipino, then that should be at least around 193 billion already. So there's something wrong with the way they're computing contingent liability and reserve fund.
I actually wanted to talk about that because we had DOH on the show and they were saying that PhilHealth should not operate like a life insurance provider. It should operate like an HMO or health insurance provider, that it should keep certain amount of money for the year. And kung para siyang basket na kumbaga mag-ambagan tayo para pag may nagkasakit, sagot natin yon. And then the next year, if somebody else gets sick, yung pera naman ng ibang pupunta sa kanya. Pero hindi siya yung buong buhay hanggang sa mamatay, you have to hold on to the money. So they were saying that PhilHealth should keep a smaller, baka mali yung computation nung insurance liability. Parang
well, they have to. Yeah, they have to. Well, they have to have a reserve fund. The way they compute the reserve fund has to be reviewed kasi hindi naman pwedeng you utilize all the money. Kasi you have to make sure that you have extra funds to cover unanticipated expenditure. Kasi yung forecasted expenditure naman is based on predicted costs, but you cannot really take into account all the possible costs that the country will incur in terms of healthcare. So that, I think kanina then there was recognition that there's insufficient capacity in terms of actuarial skills in PhilHealth. So I think it's good that we're not only talking about the legal framework, but also the technical capacity of PhilHealth as an institution.
Earlier, no, sila Regina in Storycon were able to interview Dr. Mingita Padilla. She was making a suggestion to remove the execom because she said, these are the people that are really working behind the scenes and boots on the ground with the policies and all of that. And actually, the president is, kasi, last admin, we had a bunch of different PhilHealth chiefs. What are your thoughts on that? Are you on the same page? I know she was also one of the petitioners or part of the group.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a review of the organization of PhilHealth and the people who are working in PhilHealth, because I don't think you can just parachute one person and expect that person to really fix all the problems of PhilHealth. Clearly, the problems of PhilHealth is bigger than just having an incompetent president. So it's very important for to have an organizational review of PhilHealth.
Right. Professor, if I could just shift gears now and talk about the rallies from Friday, because we haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. Related din naman, because we're talking about budget issues. Your groups were protesting the 2025 budget as well. You said it was a reflection ng matinding corruption. Also, the second issue being calling for the impeachment of the Vice President. What was your assessment of how those rallies turned out and what's next for the group?
No, for me it was a success because a lot of people came, most of them unaligned, expressing the same sentiment regarding the budget and of course the call to impeach VP Sara. Actually, not just impeach, but to take act for the current administration to take action against the corrupt practices of the Vice President and her father, and also the crimes that he has committed. So that's it. I actually want to take opportunity also to clarify some things, because there were reports in the media of individuals attending na binayaran daw and all.
Yes.
And that was quite disappointing for me, because those pictures that were shown, or the videos, or the individuals that were shown were not from our protest rally in the afternoon. So I was a bit disappointed dun sa mga reporters for not clarifying which rally those individuals participated. So we have a statement from the citizens and clergy for good governance that we are very sure that those participants were not from our rally in the afternoon.
So as far as you know, nobody was paid and nobody was planted, kasi that was the other accusation, may mga plinant daw.
Well, actually, yung planted, meron kami. Kasi I remember some of the participants approaching me and they said that they saw it and sinita talaga nila. And nung sinita nila, biglang umalis. And they were giving money to our participants. And the participants said hindi nila kilala itong tao. Bigla na lang sila binibigyan ng money. And nung sinita nga ng mga ibang participants, biglang umalis. So they reported it to me. So in our event, it actually happened. But those individuals who appeared in the video, clearly, they were not participants of our event.
Ano po yung panawagan in the event na walang magyari sa impeachment before Thursday, because or at least by Thursday,
2 days
because
left
2 days
before
left.
Congress goes on recess.
Meron bang isa pang call or plano na mag-rally in case that doesn't pan out?
But we will continue our demands for this administration to actually hold the Vice President accountable. Kasi enumerate naman na yung mga basis for filing of cases against her and for impeaching her. So I don't think we will stop from stating this demand.
Professor,
Sorry, Prof.
go ahead.
Any thoughts on Vice President Sara Duterte saying she's now seriously considering running for president 2028?
Well, anyone can decide to run in 2028. So parang hindi naman siya surprising on my part na magkaroon siya ng ganung decision.
Fair point.
Hey, Professor, the Supreme Court is asking government to explain itself in the challenge of the constitutionality of the budget. At this point, what do you think can happen? If this budget is actually declared unconstitutional, we have an election year coming up. We have a special budget for that. Will we get a reenacted budget? And, you know, wouldn't that end up in a crisis of some sort?
Well, if the Supreme Court, we're also planning to file our a case against the 2025 budget, maybe in a week or two. But in the event that the Supreme Court declares the 2025 budget unconstitutional, then Congress can easily convene themselves and amend the current budget to correct the problem. So in the meantime, kapag na-declare yun and Congress has not convened itself, then we will have the reenacted budget. But Congress always has that opportunity to amend the 2025 budget and to correct it so that we can avoid the situation of a completely reenacted budget for 2025.